Welcome, good afternoon at this Studio Offshore Energy organized by TKI Offshore Energy. My name is Bob Meijer. I'll be your host for this webinar. And it's great to have you all here, the audience, the speakers, but also the media who are present in this webinar during your lunch break, most probably. Today's webinar is about ports, about port logistics, for transport, installation, maintenance, decommissioning, and the challenges that we have if you look at this upscaling of offshore wind and the requirements for port capacity. TKI Offshore Energy has commissioned Haskoning to do a study into this capacity, and today Lammers from Haskoning will present the highlights of this report. The report, by the way, can be found on our website. The link will be posted in the chat shortly. And also during this webinar, we've asked Joost Eenhuizen from Port of Rotterdam to give some reflections. And of course, you as audience will be able to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer most of those during the webinar. If that's not possible, we'll come back to you with some answers for unanswered questions. So the webinar is being recorded, and with that, I would like to invite Leon to present the highlights of the study that Haskoning has performed.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction. And let me share my screen. And then open the presentation for you. All right. Assuming everything is visible for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. We can see your presentation, Leon. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Then I'll just start right off. Thank you all for joining. I'll be talking a little bit about the research that we did for TKI Offshore Energy and RVO in the last couple of months. It will be a sneak preview. So if you want to get into the real depths of the report, you can download it, as Bob already mentioned. So maybe to start, a little bit of background. As you all probably know, the Netherlands has a target of 70 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050 to serve as the backbone of the energy transition to a CO2-free electricity system. However, what we see now is that the ambition is actually outpacing infrastructure. So ports are becoming a bottleneck for deployment. They are not the only bottleneck, but they are a very physical and important bottleneck to be dealt with. So what is our analysis? The central question was, what are actually the implications for port infrastructure and logistics of the foreseen offshore scale-up of offshore wind up to 2050? And we had a specific focus on innovation. So what can innovation do to maybe soften the demand or solve some of the bottlenecks? So how did we do that? We looked at scenarios for market development. I'll go into that in more detail later. We looked at translating the ambitions to port requirements. So how many meters of quay, how many hectares of land, what kind of requirements are needed. And also, we then looked at the port capacity that is actually available in the Netherlands. So not just there physically, but also able to be booked. A specification of the port efficiency metrics was included. So how can we actually measure how good a port is doing? And we validated this through interviews and a port workshop at the Offshore Energy Conference in November. So about the scenarios. We all know that the target is 70 gigawatts. However, we also know that the last couple of years have been quite rough for offshore wind industry. Formally, the 70 gigawatts still stands, but we have looked at a scenario where we take it a little bit slower, but this is still very ambitious, right? We looked at the primary medium scenario in the middle, where we grow to 21 gigawatts in 2032-ish, then grow to 40 gigawatts in 2040, up to 63 in 2050. This is a massive scale up by any means. And so how did we do that? The future capacity is actually calculated by scaling wind farm sizes and applying a 5-year averaging to stabilize the pipeline and to also take out any big peaks in the demand. And if we now switch over to the supply of port capacity, this map of the Netherlands gives a good indication of where our capacity is for the large-scale offshore wind construction projects. Notably, this does not include O&M yet, but we'll have a slide on that later. What we see is in the north, in the Groningen seaport, you have the boost terminals, and we have Wagenborg, Stevedoring, taking a serious amount of hectares. Then we have the TMA terminal in Amsterdam, which is actually behind the lock. However, they are active already in offshore wind and are looking to do more. Then we have the Energiehaven Eimond in IJmuiden, which is status unconfirmed, I would say, hoping to add 15 hectares as that is much needed. Then we have the exciting new project by Port of Rotterdam, the Tower Terminal, 45 hectares, significant addition to the capabilities in the Netherlands that is aimed for mid-2029 to be available. Also, we have in Rotterdam the SIF terminal. We put it in for 30 hectares. It depends a little bit on how much of the 60 plus hectares that they have are available for actually installing projects. But definitely a player to take into account. Then we go to the south, to Vlissingen, North Sea Port, where we have, on the bottom, we have the Bow Terminal, 17.5 hectares. It's fully operational and actively used for many offshore wind farms. And then we have the extension for the Bow Terminal, about 34 hectares added this year. And we have Verbrugge Terminal, which is still occupied, but hopefully in the near future could become available. If it's going to be used for offshore wind or not, that is, of course, a question for themselves. So currently, we see Dutch ports offer about 120 hectares of operational terminal space dedicated to offshore wind logistics. And we have a pipeline of a potential 100 additional hectares underway. So this looks quite good. However, one of the most important things that we noted is that Dutch port capacity is mostly used for projects outside the Netherlands. This is due to the strong capabilities of the ports and proximity to international projects. It is a very international market, and it's very hard to say that Dutch ports should only work for Dutch projects. That would not be suitable anyway, because there's not work every year, and these ports are just commercial players. So the sector requires an increased international cooperation to manage this shared North Sea capacity effectively. If you look at the chart on the right, it shows the share of the available terminal capacity that is actually used for Dutch projects, nicely put in orange. And you can see that most of it, up to at least 2040, is used for wind farm projects outside the Netherlands. So typically United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, and other countries. So what should we do? The path forward could be, there's two paths to actually investigate physical expansions. We are looking at the Tower Terminal, but also maximizing utilization of what we have. That can be by more effectively pushing more megawatts through each hectare, but also looking at new areas that have typically not been associated with offshore wind, and maybe using those as well. So how can ports respond? On the ambitions will exceed the supply chain capacity. So what kind of innovations would you be looking at, right? Maybe can we do bigger projects quicker? So typically you would say a 1 gigawatt wind farm project takes 25 hectares for the turbine marshalling. What if we can actually do a 2 gigawatt on the same plot? That would be a twofold increase of the capacity. Can we do it quicker? Can we reduce the dwell time of the components? Make unsuitable terminals suitable. Now, there's also the trend that we all know that turbines are going to get bigger. And rather than just build out more and bigger and stronger quays, what role could there be for innovation to maybe add more capacity? Offshore wind supply chains are complex, and well, nobody knows exactly yet what the future will look like, and if Asian or more specifically Chinese OEMs will become more involved in Europe. What we know is that if they become more integrated in the European supply chain, typically the lead times are longer and the uncertainty goes up, and then that means you want to have bigger buffer storage at your port, requiring more port space. Also, Chinese turbines tend to be larger than the Western OEMs, so that could also have an effect on the requirements on the ports. Yeah, and maybe accommodate larger vessels, etc. So, if we look at what kind of innovations we did a large assessment of what kind of solution spaces should we be looking for. If we knew all the innovations that were going to happen, we would probably be very rich. But we can look at what areas are most suitable for innovations to improve the capacity. So what have we looked at? We have 5 different areas. Supply chain optimization. As ports become scarce, we expect that the economic factors will shift the logistics to prioritize port usage. Up till now, the very pricey installation vessels have been governing actually most of the decisions. But as soon as these vessels will have no place in the port anymore, maybe that will change how decisions are being made. What we, for instance, see is the potential for feedering and direct delivery. This can have a big impact, for instance, for terminals that are not directly located at the seaside, but maybe a little bit more inland. Maybe they become more accessible. Next one is smart modeling and prediction. Smart tooling can help the coordination in the supply chain and help to make them agile and to assist timely action, potentially reducing buffers and margins. I think from what we heard before, it's always difficult to increase or make this better. But we have also seen examples where, for instance, what you can see in the image, the port of Esbjerg has made significant improvements by using a digital twin. Then we have the infrastructural capacity optimization. So many ports are not suitable for offshore wind yet, but innovations can help to monitor and get an eye on and prevent high load cases and lower the technical requirements. So what kind of examples? More load spreading or pre-assembly, but maybe also changing a little bit how the towers are built up and maybe not even completely building up the towers on the quayside. Equipment and handling, the flexible stands, grips and yard equipment supporting various turbine models, higher stacking densities, maybe stacking components or enhancing wind port capacity that way. I think especially the Danish standard that's been worked on is interesting. But yeah, this saves a lot of time for wind turbine installation vessels with mobilization and demobilization if they have to change grips all the time. So standardization and flexible equipment that can take a lot of different sizes, for instance. We believe there is a lot of room for optimization and innovation there. Finally, unlocking port areas. So storage can be distributed over the port to focus critical operations in the deep water terminal, enabling larger project capacity. So what does it mean? Maybe there is a plot of land that is not directly at quayside. Maybe you can use that for storage and have a higher turnover at the yard that is close to the quay. Maybe, for instance, by heavy load road crossings, like you see here in Eemshaven. Another important aspect is that O&M ports are often forgotten in this whole discussion, and also that decommissioning is steadily and quickly coming our way, also requiring a lot of port capacity. This requires integration of that in as a core pillar of the long-term port planning. We must definitely not forget about these. O&M ports are smaller than construction ports, but often face significant space limitations because of the ports are already fully used for other purposes. You can see the image on the right. It's the blue port center in Den Helder, which is a good example of a nice O&M development that is going to be used. Then for O&M, the footprint is for long term, right? So it requires a permanent presence over 25 or more years. This is very different than the terminals for construction, which have a very high rotation. And then we have the operational efficiency. A lot of research has been done, and also strategies from the oil and gas industry can be applied to optimize berth occupancy. I think also Den Helder has a lot of experience in that. About decommissioning, that's starting already in small volumes, but the long term is a bit harder to quantify. I think one of the concerns is what will happen to these large structures once they have been removed and put on a port terminal. How long are they going to stay there if the pressure from a project is not there? And if they are dwelling on these port places a long time, that can have a very significant effect on the port availability. So that should definitely be included in future port capacity planning and will grow fast from around 2035. All right, so this is the quick introduction. Please have a look at the report. And if you want to have a little bit more information about predictive simulation, welcome to join 5 March at another webinar that we are doing, some commercial from our side. So that's it from my side.
Well, thank you very much, Leon, and great presentation. You've been able to capture the core of the report in a very short time. And of course, the link to the report is now posted also in the chat, so you're all invited to read the report in more detail. First of all, before we dive into the questions that are now filling up the chat, and thanks for these questions, and please continue to ask these questions. I would like to invite Joost Eenhuizen from Port of Rotterdam to give his reflections on what he's just heard from the study from Haskoning. Joost.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Leon. Thanks for the prepared report. I've been able to read it up front already, so I can definitely say that it's worthwhile to read. To introduce a little bit about myself, my name is Joost Eenhuizen. I work for the Port of Rotterdam Authority, acting as a commercial manager for the breakbulk and offshore industry. And indeed, I was glad to see that one of our projects, the tower project, which is about a new offshore wind terminal at the Maasvlakte, is already in the report. So we're glad with that. To me, when I was reading the report, a lot of familiar information noticed. Thank you for that. I still have some remarks to make, so I will introduce them later on, and I think they also align with some of the questions already being asked. So all in all, to tell you a little bit about Tower in relation to this report. The report is clearly showing a large need of port capacity, and that is indeed what we have seen as well. We did our research as well, and Tower is indeed aimed to help a little bit in that respect. And what is nice to see that the timing of these bottlenecks are foreseen in the years 2030 roughly. So that's where Tower is as well being planned. So that's good to see. And what I also like about the report, and that's especially with the parts on the innovation, we don't know yet how to lease out Tower. I have to be honest. We recently sent out an RFI, and this report provided us with a lot of information as well on how to specifically lease out the terminal, to which party, to which timing, and in what market dynamics. So in a way, it's very helpful for our project as well. So there's a kind of win-win for it. The project Tower hopefully helps to reduce the port capacity constraint, and the report itself helps us with the internal decision-making process. So that's just as a brief introduction on what I've read so far.
Yeah, thank you, Joost, for your perspective on this. And of course, yeah, the 45 hectares of Tower are a great addition to the required capacity. If I look at some of the, say, longer-term developments, we see that, for example, in Hamburg, it was also planned to have 15 gigawatts per annum installed from the North Sea countries. And so this international dimension is also very important, I guess, for Rotterdam, but also for the outlook. So do you see also the international developments requiring more coordination in a way between ports? Because that was also the idea behind the 15 gigawatt, that governments would kind of coordinate these tenders to have a better planning and a more stable rollout schedule. Do you need coordination between ports in the Netherlands or even in the North Sea ports?
Yeah, I think you're touching here a very important point. Yes, I'm really agreeing with you. But I have to say that then we're talking about, let's say, the public parties. The international pipeline and the coordination with that's done by public parties. And to make the best use out of existing port capacity, that's done by private companies. So what I see still is this gap between, well, what public entities would like to achieve and how they are able or not able to make it in a proper pipeline, compared to, let's say, all the commercial dynamics between port operators and individual offshore wind developers. So there's definitely something to achieve, and this would definitely be something that would help a lot. A proper pipeline would help out not only for port terminals, but for the entire industry. But the question is, of course, how to make that aligned.
Yeah, I see also Leon nodding. So you agree with that? Probably is one of the solutions that you suggest, also this coordination aspect. And coming to one of the questions in the chat from Wart Gommeren about also the use of port capacity for other applications. And of course, the wind industry is also potentially competing for space, for example, with defense, given all the geopolitical developments. So, Leon, did you already incorporate that in your views, this potential competition also with, for example, defense capacity that's required?
I think it's an excellent question. So the quick answer is that this is an analysis of the offshore wind capacity that is needed. So we did not include the defense, but maybe it's good to mention, since we have Joost here on the call as well, that in Rotterdam, they are not just developing Tower, they're also developing a defense terminal. So yeah, I think these two are the hot thing in port development in the Netherlands at the moment.
Yeah, and I can add to that that indeed in Rotterdam, besides Tower, it has already been announced that defense is wishing for a defense terminal, which we are able to provide. But for sure, as the infrastructure is very much alike, we do keep an eye on, of course, as they are working, or as actually they are besides each other, in what way this can influence each other. In a way, there are two different parties involved. Defense has its own dynamics, as you may understand, compared to offshore wind. But as the infrastructure is very much alike, we do like to see them cooperate in some way or the other. But again, this is a wish from a, let's say, public entity like we are. And we still have to negotiate with commercial parties on the lease out of the terminal and another public party, the Defense, Ministry of Defense. So it's not easy said and done, but for sure there should be something between those two markets, as we have already seen in Esbjerg as well. They work very close together on those premises as well. So there should be something possible.
Okay, well, that's good news in a way. If there's also some flexibility in the way we can use that space. So one of the questions from Paul in the chat is about what these bottlenecks really are. So in the report, you give more detail, but maybe now for this webinar, could you elaborate a bit on that? Is it the yard? Is it the quayside space? Is it strength, logistical factors? Could you say something about that, Leon? Oh, you're on mute. Oh.
How about now?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, good question. What we see is that it's obviously closely linked together, and what we see is that storage yard area is a main indicator of the total demand in the industry. However, that storage yard capacity is useless if you don't have a high heavy load quay to match up. And we see that actually the requirements for the quays are much higher than what we currently see, right? So if you build a quay for offshore wind, then it can do pretty much anything because the requirements are so high. So it's a combination of a lot of laydown area with very strong quays. That is a challenge, and not just in the Netherlands. We see this all across the world actually. So yeah, for fixed wind, it's definitely a combination.
Yeah. Okay, I see also that somebody raised his hand, Bert. So I can't unmute you. That's not possible. Only presenters can talk and share their screens. But if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. So maybe on a different topic. So in the presentation, you said that for larger turbines, rather than just be flexible through innovation. Do you think standardization could play an important role to basically improve and optimize the logistics around T&I?
Yes, I think this is a debate that's been going on for a while. Can we standardize maybe the North Sea standards? And yeah, definitely, I think that a lot can be gained there. However, it's also a challenge because there will be pressures to lower cost, and the big question is always, will that come from more standardization and industrialization, or is there still more to be gained from scaling up? I think the European offshore wind industry is taking slightly moving towards the first, but yeah, it's hard for me to
So, and that's also one of the points, of course, from Hamburg was that the industry basically pledged a 30% cost reduction. And that could potentially come through further industrialization. If I hear this, I think maybe more, say, standardizing on maximum component sizes would improve the whole logistics, including also the dwelling time potentially. The installation rates could go up in that way. That could help to maybe optimize existing port capacity.
Yeah, and I think we always think that the way we're doing it is optimal, and there's not much to be gained. But recently we had in the light of this research, we had a discussion within our port consultancy expert group, and they have a lot of experience in, for instance, container terminals. And if you see the gains in efficiency that have been made very recently still in container terminals, like 20-30%, which you wouldn't expect because that is so heavily standardized already, and then there's still so much more gains. So I think I would really challenge the industry to think out of the box and say, how can we make this more efficient? Because I think there's a lot to be gained.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that perspective. Big numbers, even in an industry that's so well developed logistically. So in the chat, there's also the question from Eric about the digital twin that was used in Esbjerg. So you also mentioned optimization through these type of methods could be possible. Can you elaborate on that, Leon?
Yeah, I strongly believe that for any player in the market, if you have these models and these simulation tools, that really helps to gain insight, because it's so complicated. Spreadsheets just don't work anymore if it's becoming so complicated. If you have weather impact, that kind of issues, I think it can be an excellent decision support tool. I think that's also why we have just recently acquired a simulation company. Maybe Portwise has now been becoming part of the Haskoning group, and yeah, we really believe that this is the way forward.
Yeah,
I would like to add to that.
Yeah, of course, Joost.
I strongly believe in those solutions. I don't have all the details on the digital twin in Esbjerg, but I've been told a little bit about it. To my knowledge, it's only now focused, let's say, within the premises of Port of Esbjerg itself. It would be even of much higher value if it would be a solution that can be incorporated throughout the supply chain. Because if also the supply is part of that whole, let's say, optimization model, as well as the output at sea, and if you can have that fully aligned, I think then you can get the maximum out of it. But that requires much more, I always call them the strategic partnerships. I think we are all aware that this market of offshore industry is still project driven, which has made it strong and innovative, but it holds us back in a way of attaching those solutions and innovations. And I strongly believe, and I foresee that in the coming years, that more big players are finding each other. There is this example of Ørsted capturing long-term capacity in wind turbine installation vessels. So they will probably do that with port capacity as well, being the offshore wind developers or the OEMs or terminal operators. So I think they all should strive for longer-term partnerships in which it's more easy to gain all the efficiencies of the innovations mentioned in the report.
Yeah, interesting viewpoint. Yeah, and so looking at more questions in the chat, there is a question from Wouter about delays, and yeah, I think we've been seeing the market moving up and down and up and down. So there is uncertainty in this, and I think also we're kind of catching up with also new policies. So was it 30 gigawatts in 2040, or it's now 40? So things are really changing quite a lot. That probably also makes it difficult to plan. Maybe Hamburg will help in that respect. But the question really is, how are these delays factored in? And maybe first for you, Joost, how is it to deal with these type of changing market circumstances?
Yeah, well, I refer to the earliest ANZAC report of Haskoning, in which they clearly indicated 4 or 5 main topics that withholds ports to invest in port capacity. I think they are all still there, and one of those items is, of course, the uncertainty. We are dealing with that as well, and to be honest, we do still have to make that final investment decision on tower, and this is, of course, one of the particular items that's on the table. And how we deal with it is that we are talking to a lot of parties to get the best insights possible, but still knowing that it only lasts for the coming 4 or 5 years, maybe, if we talk about guaranteed business. So what we need to do as a port authority is to make our own and maybe even different risk analysis on building port capacity. As we're used to build it for 25 years or even longer, we now have to take a different risk approach in having certainty on maybe a shorter term, whereas there should be a belief in what it will still be of value for the longer term. That's a different risk analysis.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing right now. Of course, there's still the possibility to lease out for 25 years, but it comes with other commercial negotiations done. But we strive to be fully aligned with the business in a way that we can provide them the proper infrastructure with the proper commercial proposition. It's not yet decided, but yes, it's one of the biggest issues now, because there's no straight correlation, for instance, between GDP and this business. If we would have had that like the container business, it's far more easy to make those projections on when you need additional capacity and how it will fill up. But we've done it not earlier in our port. So you see that it also requires some different insights and especially different mindset on our side.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, maybe the longer term perspective with the policy statements that we've seen now from the new Dutch government, but also from Hamburg. And the target of 300 gigawatts is still important. The 15 gigawatts per annum, potentially coordinated, will help to create this more stabilized outlook.
Well, maybe to add, because one of the bottlenecks, as was presented in the Haskoning report, was that that other market segments offer a better business case to port authorities when it comes to leasing out of land or nautical infrastructure. That's true. The offshore wind business is not, let's say, the best earning square meter in our port in general, I have to say, but that's not what we're into. But the positive side of this project-driven business, and maybe a shorter term lease that is maybe possible, it also opens up the flexibility for a port authority to redirect well, let's say in 10, 15, or maybe even 20 years to those other segments. So that's actually what's going on now. So the fact that it's short term also should provide us with a potential benefits to be flexible in the port planning. So that's a balance that's, well, at this moment highly actual, because that's where we have to make the balance and the decision about what is the long-term lease or the lease duration of this tower.
Yeah. Daniel, you want to reflect on this, or?
I think this has been very well put by Joost, so nothing to add.
Yeah, and then maybe there's a longer post from Bert in the chat from Net Zero, with some of the questions. In fact, we've just been discussing those, the policy updates. Maybe the third remark that Bert makes, that could be very interesting. And we touched on the potential coordination, cooperation between defense space and offshore wind space. Could we make use of the 1.5 GDP target of NATO in this respect for kind of joint developments in there?
In general, and not only speaking for the Port of Rotterdam, I would say yes, and not only port capacity, but also in road, rail, and even inland waterways connections. To be honest, when talking about the tower project, we will do that on a business case. Well, we will decide on a business case, not taking into account at this moment, as far as I know. I didn't talk to the treasurer of our company, but to have it as a sole business case. But in general, yes, also in the Port of Rotterdam, we have already had some gatherings with the Ministry of Defense to invite parties and companies to present up their ideas and how that can be combined with the wish, but also the money that defense is bringing to the market. So it's all over, yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's and a great question. Thanks for that, Bert. And maybe the last question because we were approaching the end of the webinar. The last question is the second question that Bert raises, and maybe more for Leon. So if you look at the developments outside the Netherlands, what can you say about that? Are there similar webinars being held in the UK or in Denmark or Germany? What's happening?
Yes, no, we see the same discussions everywhere. Actually, we are working for the Scottish government at the moment as well, doing a similar study in looking into the ambitions and the port capacity, looking at different demand scenarios. Scotland has a very big pipeline of projects. I think 2 years ago, we did a study for Norway, who have big plans. There have been some good connections with Germany as well, who are really looking to cooperate more. It's all nice, but it's still too siloed, I think. I would say there have been some good steps have been made. So there's now the shared tender planning by NSEC. But I think we can take it a step further. And I think we should definitely aim for more integration, more planning together, to even out the planning to avoid the big peaks and troughs that are so difficult for the industry to adopt.
Yeah, and of course, in the report you mentioned that for floating wind, you really look at outside the Netherlands because the space requirements for floating wind would, of course, also be enormous if you look at that capacity.
Yes, floating wind is a little bit further out from the Netherlands. So you see that the deeper waters required for floating wind are mostly when you approach Scotland and Norway and Ireland as well, and France also has a big floating market. So typically, although Rotterdam has actually played a role in some floating developments as well, we don't see a very big role for the Dutch ports in the floating wind.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for that. Maybe the final question, it's about the wind turbine capacity that you've assumed. Of course, in the report, you've said a bit more about that, but maybe you can say something, a question from Jelle, about the wind turbine capacity.
Okay, let me read that question before I answer it.
Well, I couldn't find what the megawatt per turbine assumption was for the report. And the following question was, would larger capacity wind turbines result in more stringent requirements? I think you've covered that in the report and in the presentation. But the assumptions that you've made?
I think what's interesting to state here is that what we see from this report, but also from earlier reports, is that if you increase the megawatts per turbine, the sizes of the components go up, and the requirements on the quayside also go up. However, you need less turbines per gigawatt. So for a 1 gigawatt project, the size evens out. So the hectares. However, there are some. This is a very high level approach, right? So logistically, there will be some new challenges if you have larger turbines. So what kind of cranes are you going to use? How many sets do you want to have in your port? Because sets are bigger. So if you have the same amount of sets that you want, then you need more space. Maneuvering space. So that definitely has an impact. And I think we have calculated with turbines going from 15 to 20 megawatts, and then there's some scenarios as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. And I see that Jelle is continuing the conversation in the chat, but probably has to do that directly with yourself. So it is a 1:45, and I would like to wrap up this webinar. First of all, I'd like to thank very much Leon and Joost for sharing the report and the views from the port industry and from the Port of Rotterdam on this. I would like to thank the audience for their attention, but also participation in the chat. There may be some questions that are unanswered, and we'll try to come back to them via the mail. And also the recording of this webinar will be made available online later on. Again, a big thank you for your contributions and attention. And with that, I would like to close the webinar. Have a great day.